uh, the conversations they had with the people that they interviewed. I'm so excited about that. It's a wonderful way to end a very, very difficult week. And we need to acknowledge the kind of backdrop of our gathering today. The world is still happening. Even as we celebrate these young folk, we need to understand we celebrate them in the context of a world that is seemingly mad at times, but thank God for them. Baldwin, man, he's, shaped by parents who were migrants, a stepfather who came from Louisiana, a mother who came from the eastern shore of Maryland. He didn't know his biological father. He grew up in Harlem. So in some ways, Baldwin is that first generation of children born as a result of the Great Migration. He's born in August of 1924, which means he's 5 when the Great Depression hits, 5, 6 years old when the Great Depression. So he comes of age in a moment of scarcity. And it's very important too that he's bookend. So it's the Great Depression and the Harlem Renaissance. This is in some way shaping the environment in which he sees himself. But he's not a child of Sugar Hill. Sugar Hill is that upper class Black space where Du Bois and Langston Hughes and those folk moved about. Baldwin grew up in the Hollow, what we would call the hood. He was the oldest of 9 kids. His stepfather died of tuberculosis, was very abusive, very strict. In a lot of ways, Baldwin's sexuality, his effeminacy, right, made him the object of his stepfather's scorn. But he was brilliant, brilliant. The stories danced around in his head. So he's shaped by his poverty. He's shaped by the reality of the interrelationship between race and poverty. He's also shaped by these deeply interpersonal relationships that are vexed and complicated. He had to forge a sense of self in relation to an environment that was impinging upon him, because there were times when he couldn't eat. Tells the story of his father giving him a dime to go to the store. He trips, the dime falls into the sewage. He has the sewer, and he has to tell his stepfather, and his stepfather beats him mercilessly in the middle of the floor. So there's deprivation. There are these intimate encounters, but brother, he wills himself into becoming one of the most extraordinary writers in the Western world, the most insightful critic of American democracy and race that we've ever produced. And there's a story about a choice that he decided to make, and that was in 1948, he decided to leave the United States and go to Paris with what, $40 in his pocket or something like that. And he became James Baldwin.
So that's are you saying he became James Baldwin in Paris? There was something about that distance that helped shape him?
Yeah, when you read the introduction to Nobody Knows My Name, he says very clearly that he had to leave the United States, right? In the Price of the Ticket, an essay he wrote in 1984, he says that, or an interview he gave near the end of his life, and Partisan Review rather, he said he had to leave the United States because either he was going to get killed or somebody was going to kill him. That the rage in his stepfather, the rage of having to come of age in a space, in a country that denies one dignity and standing, that subjects you to daily humiliation, in a country that in some ways despises you. And then you begin to believe what the country says about yourself. And Baldwin says that was beginning to take root in him, in his spirit, you see. And he had to leave in order to not have that ongoing battle, so that he could actually do the work of creating a self, do the work of creating the person who would write the stories dancing around in his head. So that distance was absolutely necessary. I'm looking for I got all my books around here. So, uh, yeah, give you a sense of what he said though in the introduction to Nobody Knows My Name, right? It's a fascinating moment. He says, here it is right here. In America, the color of my skin had stood between myself and me. In Europe, that barrier was down. Nothing is more desirable than to be released from an affliction, but nothing is more frightening than to be divested of a crutch. It turned out that the question of who I was not solved because I had removed myself from the social forces which menaced me. Anyway, these forces had become interior, and I had dragged them across the ocean with me. The question of who I was had at last become a personal question, and the answer was to be found in me. Yeah.
So even as, I mean, you're reading from Baldwin, as you read, I can hear his voice because he had such a beautiful voice. And the way you write, even as you're reading it, it just pulls you in. So I just couldn't help but mark that. I want to go back to something you said just
Sure.
a minute ago. You said Baldwin needed to make space so he could, quote, do the work of creating a self. And I like to think that that's what students at City with the Baldwin Prize are doing, at least in some small part. We try to come up with the prompt that forces them to dig deep. And then we kind of stand back in awe at what they discover. Can you talk, what is that work of creating a self, especially for a writer? What's involved in that?
Being honest with yourself, confronting your own fears, confronting your wounds and your pain, your joys and triumphs, the things that excite you. Look, many students at City will read with Ralph Waldo Emerson. They will read Self-Reliance, right? And there's a sense in which Emerson wants us to listen to our own voice. But what Baldwin does, he grabs Emerson by the collar and brings him across the tracks. What does it mean to imagine oneself in the grandest and most expansive of terms, under conditions in which a society believes that you are less valued, a society that has been organized in such a way that to be in a particular body is to experience a generalized sense of disregard. So part of the work that of self-creation involves, right, this interior examination, to take what's happening on the inside seriously. Give you a story. So I'm trying to write this book, right? I signed the contract, the sentences aren't coming. And Baldwin is with me, because I had a spirit, a saint candle with me the whole time, right? This one was sent to me by Reverend William Barber. I burned the other one while I was writing the book. And the sentences weren't dancing. And then I hear Jimmy's voice saying, old boy, if we're going to do this together, you're going to have to deal with you.
Oh boy.
And what did that mean? I had to deal with the fact that I'm a frightened little boy from Mississippi with daddy issues. That my father put that fear in my gut at an early age, and I've been trying to prove that I'm not a coward ever since. And the moment in which I turned to me honestly, without the comfort of my illusions, the sentences started dancing. Because Baldwin will say this, he'll say, because he reads his Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And then he'll say the messiness of the world, Lionel, is actually a reflection of the messiness of our interior lives. So one of the things that our students have to do, right, if they're going to find their own voice, right, they got to deal with their own pains, their own fears, right? The things that keep them up at night, they're boogeymans and women, right? They have to deal with those things that make them tight, right? And they have to deal with all of the mechanisms that we use to keep ourselves, right, together. Right? We have to risk ourselves in order to get those sentences on the page, you see. That and And see, this is really important. I want to say this because uh, the way race works in the United States, they want us to live into the stereotypes.
Mhm.
So they want us to be like Abbott's book Flatland. You ever read that book about flatlands? It's you know, it's an allegory with these stories of geometrical shapes, a world that doesn't have depth, right? So they want us to be sociological statistics. They want me to be the consequence. They don't know what to do with me. My mother had her first baby in the 9th grade, dropped out of high school. They don't know what to do with me. She used to be a supervisor of a janitorial team at Ingalls Shipyard. My dad was a postman, thank God, right? Right. None of they want us to live into the stereotypes. And part of what we have to do is to imagine ourselves otherwise, or to put it even in starker terms, we got to learn how to sing off key so the world could hear us.
Wow.
You see? Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Learn how to sing off key so the world can hear us. As you talk about um, digging deep, telling the truth about yourself, facing your fears,
Mhm.
I hear implicit in that, at least in my hearing, is a relational and a communal element. I don't know that you can do these things without other people. You need other people as sounding boards. A writer needs an audience. Um, Anyone who's going to be brave also needs other people to be a source of comfort at some point. Could could you talk about the types of relationships that helped Baldwin with that work, and to the
Sure.
extent you're comfortable talking about that for yourself, the kind of relationships that make your work possible?
Sure. So you think about Baldwin, he goes to DeWitt Clinton High School, becomes the editor of the Magpie. He's not a very good student. He's not a straight A student, y'all. Um, his mind wanders, but he loves writing. Many of the people who worked with him on that high school newspaper became close friends who would help get Notes of a Native Son published.
Hmm.
Would go on to do Richard Avenden would go on to do a book of photographs with him entitled Nothing Personal, published in 1964. So there's a community of folk who outside of his narrow church community, because Baldwin was, back.
So I
Something
think
happened.
that was my mistake. Yeah.
That's okay. Storefront Baptist and Pentecostal. He had some students, some friends around him, a teacher, Bill, who took him to the theater. He bumped into Buford Delaney, an artist, who said, "Wait, look at the light in this puddle in the street." And Jimmy was like, "It's just you'd imagine a puddle in the street of Baltimore. It's just a puddle." He's like, "No, look." And then suddenly Baldwin sees, right, the light, the glimmer, the angle of the reflection. Buford Delaney teaching him how to perceive the world and to see beauty in it, right? Became his first, in some ways, mentor. Lovers, right? Who made him possible in so many ways, who gave him a sense of comfort. But also, Baldwin said he couldn't find a job after high school because he little frail guy who prone to the dramatic, found himself being supported by, you know, New York intellectuals. Dwight McDonald saying to him, "You are very smart," giving him a job in in leftist periodicals to review a book, throwing books at him. Read this, read that, read this. He knew he couldn't get a job at the Amsterdam News, but these folk banked on folk believing in him, giving him a chance. Knocking on the door of Richard Wright. You see, I'm trying to give you an answer. Knocking on the door of Richard Wright, author of Native Son, the preeminent Black author. Said, "I got a novel." Richard Wright, "What kind of novel you got, boy?" And then suddenly Richard Wright giving him this space. "Oh, you have talent. Let me help you. Writing recommendations so he can get the fellowship that will allow him to try to finish Go Tell It on the Mountain. The first runs weren't very successful. Writing the recommendations that would get him the money that will keep his family afloat and allow him to, in some ways, make his way to Paris. And why did he go to Paris? Because there's a Black expat community in Paris where Richard Wright actually was, right? Community, yes, yes. And then when he became James Baldwin, he had to have some folk who knew him back when, who could tell him that you're not, yo, you done got new. I knew you when.
Mm-hmm.
Who would allow him the space to laugh full belly laughs, to rage and cuss at the top of his lungs, who would love him in spite of himself. The conditions for the possibility of becoming you, right, presuppose a network of love that enable you to take the risk to become you. Yeah, that's how I would put that.
So you talk about the centrality of community, and that goes against this American ideal of self-sufficiency, of the person who makes himself, and it's always him in that idea, and that's a lie, and that's phrasing you use in the book, like the lie at the heart of American life. Could you tell us what that lie is? Because so much of what you're responding to starts there.
Right. So America, in my view, is a society predicated upon what I've called the value gap. This belief that white people matter more than others, and we've built a kind of broad architecture to justify that belief by telling ourselves that we are examples of democracy achieved, that we are the shining city on the hill, a redeemer nation, and the like. But Baldwin wrote an essay entitled The White Problem in 1964. And I'm paraphrasing him here. He says, the Christians who founded the nation had a fatal flaw. So those persons who came, who thought they were going to build a new nation, had to justify the role that this chattel played in their lives. And so the way in which they justified the role of this chattel is that they said that these men and women were not, in fact, men and women. Because if they were men and women, if they were not men and women, Baldwin says, if they were not men and women, then no crime would have been committed. So then Jimmy says this, that lie is the basis of our present trouble. So this idea that white people ought to be valued more than others, and then that belief or idea animating our social, political, and economic arrangements, and then we build a kind of discursive infrastructure to account for it, right? A way of talking, a way of being, to say, no, we're not bad. These people, they lack mental capacity, they're lazy, they are prone to criminality, they're licentious. We build an entire infrastructure to talk architecture, to justify our treatment of them, and to enable us to live in innocence. Right? Baldwin says in The Fire Next Time, published in 1963, what? He says, you can't do all, I'm paraphrasing again, you can't do all of this and be innocent too. Then he says that line, that famous line, the innocence constitutes the crime. Right? The innocence constitutes the crime. So I begin again with the lie, just kind of stepping out there. This is what it is. And even in my public commentary in our contemporary moment, folk are willing to talk about the big lie, but they're not willing to talk about the bigger lie behind, in terms of our current political circumstances, but that's a different conversation.
Could you explain that a bit? There's the big lie and the bigger lie.
So the big lie that we hear in our politics is that, Democrats stole the election, that places like Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, you get the common thread, right? That there were massive voter fraud in all of these spaces. The insurrection in January 6th was, the slogan, stop the steal. When in fact, the insurrection of January 6th is that only white voters matter. So the bigger lie behind the big lie is that this country must remain a white nation in the vein of old Europe. That the insurrection was, in fact, right, the latest rebellion fueled by white resentment and white grievance and white fear, right, rooted in the lie that this nation, right, that or the lie that white people ought to matter more than others. It seems to me that's what I mean by the bigger lie behind the lie.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Professor Glaude just a few more questions. Anyone else in the audience who has questions, please drop them into the chat. We'll go to those audience questions shortly. I mentioned this before we let everyone else into the room. So here, like, people can hear your passion, and in the book they hear that passion and your rage, and Baldwin's rage. And I would really love for you to talk about, there's a lot of policing, certainly of Black people's bodies, but also of Black people's justified rage, of many people's justified rage. You see that with women now in the Me Too movement. And I'm just curious how, I'm going to ask a question that's too big, but take it wherever you want. What are we to do with our rage? How do we channel it? How do we relate to it? Because so many people feel it, and I think if we don't give it a healthy kind of room, it is going to destroy a lot of us. And I know you're so close to that question. What are we to do?
So in Begin Again, the spine of the book is my engagement with No Name in the Street, a book that Baldwin published in 1972. And it's the first book that Jimmy publishes after the assassination of Dr. King in April of 1968. Baldwin had tried to commit suicide in 1969. A failed relationship. He felt like he couldn't, no one could love an ugly child like him, he said. Right? A failed relationship, but the fact that the country had killed King said so much about the place. And so Baldwin was trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces, not only the pieces of Black America, but himself. It collapsed. And the typical way in which studies, not so much in the academy anymore, but the kind of popular representation of Baldwin is that, he loses his grip. He starts losing a step, post 64, 65. Joseph Campbell, one of his first early biographers, says that by 1963, Baldwin's voice broke. He became too political, too polemical, too angry, too bitter. So what Begin Again tries to do is say, oh, no. Everyone's looking at Notes of a Native Son and Far Next Time and as Nobody Knows My Name as the most important of his nonfiction. And I'm like, the most important nonfiction book he's ever written is actually No Name in the Street. The book that people think is too angry. And then I say, rage lights the kiln. You cannot redact Baldwin's anger. If you do, you're not going to understand it. How can you not be angry and look at this world? I don't care what you think about the knife in hand, but to see Ma'Khia Bryant shot within seconds, right? To see George Floyd, Dante Wright, Lieutenant Nazario, the young boy in South Carolina, right? What's happening all over the country, to see it and not be angry. What is wrong with you? What does it mean that you can drive in Baltimore by particular neighborhoods that are decimated? Like I could drive in North Philly or parts of South Philly or West Philly and or even in Trenton and go and be impervious to human beings living under such conditions. Rage lights the kiln, but Baldwin wants to say, because remember what is motivating him, right? I have to leave. I had to leave this place, he said, because if I don't, I'm going to kill somebody or somebody going to kill me. He's trying to figure out how the rage must not turn into hatred, because then we become monstrous. So Baldwin will say over and over again, I want us to do something unprecedented. I want us to create a self without the need for enemies.
Mm.
That doesn't mean you have to be walking around loving and open-armed, and as Stuart Scott, the late ESPN commentator, would say, cool as the other side of the pillow. No, 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 right? No, no, no. But we can't allow the rage to transform into hatred. It has to be righteous indignation, right? And you got to be maladjusted to injustice, right? So what do we do with the rage is the question. Well, it should be the fuel to help us work for a more just world. It should be the fuel to help us work for what Baldwin called the New Jerusalem. And I'm going to say this. Oftentimes, the demand for us to quiet our rage is part and parcel of a broader demand that we quiet ourselves generally. Baldwin wrote in 1949 in an essay entitled Many, Many Thousands Gone, published in Notes of a Native Son. He says, we have to make ourselves blank in order to wash away your guilt. That the precondition of my entree into society is to leave the particularity of who I am at the door. So you can't see the fullness of me because we're worried about you being comfortable. That the condition for my being in this society is that I have to quiet myself. I have to mute my voice. Well, I refuse to do that. And Jimmy taught me not to, right? So no, we're not going to quiet ourselves. So if the world is mad, there are going to be moments when you're going to feel my anger because I'm a human being. The question is, are you? It seems to me you should be just as angry. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna please go ahead and drop your questions into the chat. We should have time for at least a few. I am looking at the list now. One audience member asks, how successful do you think as a culture we've been in building communities of love? What are some steps we can take to build those communities every day?
Well, I think we've been successful because we're here. Oh, that old gospel song, How I Got Over. I mean, there's dysfunction, of course. I mean, we're human after all. Oftentimes we want to read Black folk out of the human drama, which means we don't want to admit that we have knuckleheads just like everybody else. To account for Black life is just simply being our responsibility, is to assume the crazy kind of calculus that thousands, millions of Black people are making bad decisions every single day, all at the same time to produce all of these outcomes. No, we're just like everybody else, right? And we've loved, Baldwin has this wonderful line, man. I got it. I'm sorry. It's in fire next time. I gotta read it.
Please do.
It's in a letter to my nephew. My dungeon shook, a letter to my nephew. He says, well, you were born. Here you came, something like 15 years ago. And though your father and mother and grandmother, looking about the streets through which they were carrying you, staring at the walls into which they brought you, had every reason to be heavy-hearted, yet they were not. For here you were, Big James, named for me. You were a big baby. I was not. Here you were, to be loved, baby, hard, at once and forever to strengthen you against the loveless world. Remember that. I know how black it looks today for you. It looked bad that day too. Yes, we were trembling. We have not stopped trembling yet. But if we had not loved each other, none of us would have survived. And now you must survive because we love you. And for the sake of your children and your children's children. We've been loving under some adverse conditions, right? And so what we need to do is to understand the power of that love under our current conditions, right? That's what I say this all the time, Lionel. People are talking, Black kids need mentoring. They need mentoring. They need examples. No, we need love. Love me unconditionally and watch me fly, right? Love me unconditionally and watch me excel. We need models. Okay, sure. The best model in my life was my great granddad, who didn't have a clue about what Princeton was, right? But who loved me unconditionally. Does that make sense? See,
That
I'm
makes
tired,
perfect
y'all.
sense.
I'm exhausted. It's the end of a week, so y'all got me. I'm just unfiltered. But anyway.
No, I prefer this. Thank you. Thank you. And I love it because so often you have to cram your brilliance into a short format. They want you to do your thing in sound bites. I love this long format. And I think you're reading Baldwin's letter to his nephew. I think that's a wonderful segue to talking about the winners this year and the students who are carrying on Baldwin's work. So Professor Glaude, I just want to thank you, everyone. Please, if it's a virtual or a physical hand clap, give Professor Glaude a hand. You have blessed us today. Thank you so much. So I've thanked Professor Glaude. Before I announce this year's winners, I would also like to thank a few other people and organizations. Thanks to Principal Harcum and everyone at Baltimore City College High School who make the Baldwin Prize possible. The teachers who participated this year, and there are many more who have helped throughout the years, but this year was Morgan Kane, Amy Sampson, Patrick Daniels, Sarah Jean Blanc, and Christine Sherry. I hope I haven't missed any. Thanks to Priya Saxena of Equitable Future LLC, a strategic consulting firm, for running the judging process. So, I just summed up Priya's role in one sentence, but you all don't really understand. In a typical year, I'm talking 300 plus essays, 100 judges from 3 or 4 different countries, every essay read and scored twice according to a pretty strict rubric. Priya is the person who collects all of this data, puts it in a spreadsheet so that all I have to do, once upon a time in years 1 and 2, I read every essay. I can't do that now. Priya is the person who makes it so that I don't lose my mind. So, and she's been doing this for 3 or 4 years now. Because Priya's on the West Coast now, this is the first time they've been able to actually participate in the ceremony. So Priya, I love you so much. Thank you. I also want to thank Bob Alpert, owner of the Black accessories and apparel site, The Culture Ref on Etsy. Bob is here with us today. Another wonderful story. So we're just, Baldwin Prize, we're just doing our thing. I tweeted something about the prize, and then Bob tweeted at me, and then that's how I found out about his site. His stuff is beautiful. The Culture Ref on Etsy. He has these amazing notebooks. This is a notebook with the cover is a photo of James Baldwin's passport. And he has another one with Baldwin Baldwinite. It defines it, one who obsessively follows the writings, philosophical perspective, and shares the internal fire of writer James Baldwin. These are gorgeous, and a few students who are honored with an honorable mention are going to take these home. Also, special announcement, anyone who is already a recurring donor to the Baldwin Prize, or if you become a recurring donor to the Baldwin Prize, you could get literally $5 a year, $10 a quarter, whatever, I don't care. Become a recurring donor, and you'll be able to pick. You can pick either a autographed copy of Professor Glaude's book. Professor Glaude's incredibly capable assistant told me how I can get as many autographed copies as I want. Or you can pick from his book, or you can pick one of these notebooks, one of Bob's beautiful, beautiful notebooks. So I am going to, this is America, so I gotta do a little commerce with my philanthropy. I'm gonna drop the donation link for the Baldwin Prize into the chat. And again, anyone who becomes a recurring donor at any amount, I will contact you and you will have your choice of either of those beautiful items. So now for this year's winners, there were so many students. We had over 150 essays, and I am actually not certain all of the students who placed this year are with us on the chat, but I will just call out their names. The first honorable mention I would like to mention, she interviewed someone who went to a sleepover camp that changed the rest of his life and helped him find a friend who would become a lifelong friend. That student is Sarai Sachs. And if Sarai is here, I would love for Sarai to read an excerpt from her. There's Sarai. Okay, I'm going to ask Sarai to unmute. Sarai, congratulations and thank you. And please read us a bit from your essay.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me just pull it up really quickly.
All right.
Okay. In the summer of 1997, Ben S., then a 22-year-old college.
Sorry, I can't, Sarai, I think we're having trouble hearing you. I can't hear anymore. Still having audio issues. I think others are having the same problem.
Ben asked Naomi if she had ever tried fried chicken or had a Slurpee before. When she said that she hadn't, Ben offered to take her to the closest 7-Eleven so that she could try them. After one bite of chicken and a sip of her Slurpee, Naomi said that she couldn't believe how tasty they were, even though she was a bit skeptical at first. To thank Ben, she made him her favorite Middle Eastern dish, an Israeli staple called shakshuka, made from eggs poached in tomato sauce, onions, and spices. Ben was sold from the first bite. Soon, Ben and Naomi became good friends, like family. They would hang out and do old.
Sorry, I think it's her internet connection. You cut out, Sarai.
2 years later, Ben got a grant to return to Israel to participate in the special summer workshop for his doctoral program. His girlfriend Jenny went with him. He proposed to her on the plane. Naomi met them one night, and the three of them celebrated over some malawach, Yemenite pancakes. Ben, Jenny, and Naomi found ways to keep in touch. Since the pandemic hit last March, the family started gathering monthly via Zoom to share a meal together and hang out. Even though it's not the same, the weekly Zoom mealtime gatherings have made up for this little loss of experience.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Sarai. And this actually reminds me of a issue. Yeah, Sarai, you may not know this, but the audio cut out just a few times, but I think we caught most of the excerpt. This reminds me of an issue we had. We have writing consultations where we find adults with professional writing experience and we pair them with students. It's typically 30-minute sessions, 3 students for every 1 adult, and the adults act as a sounding board, and it's fantastic. And one thing students have been dealing with in class and in writing consultations is internet bandwidth. So students, I'm going to say, if you're having bandwidth issues, I understand it can help to turn off your video. It's less taxing on the internet connection. So if it helps to maintain the audio, don't feel shy about turning off the video so we can hear your wonderful essay. But thanks and congratulations, Sarai. And I will be in touch, and you will get one of these beautiful notebooks. Another honorable mention, this student wrote about, interviewed, I believe, a pastor who told her about a relationship that really affected the course of her life. So Natalie Kelly, if you are with us, we would love to hear a bit of your essay. Let's see. No, just gonna make sure. Oh, in the meet. Oh, okay. Ask to unmute.
Hi, okay. So my essay is Michelle Ward is a pastor at Brown Memorial. I met her when she became the new pastor in 2018. This paper is about a friend she had since childhood and how they met. At the age of 10, the shy but extroverted Michelle was a student at Ellison Elementary School in California. One day, Michelle went into the school ready to learn something new. She went to her assigned seat in the classroom. I was assigned 6th grade when I was actually in 5th grade. The teacher made this mistake because I was at a higher level at my old school, so he thought I was in 6th grade because of that. Due to this mix-up, Michelle ended up being in the same class as Sophie. They became instant friends and began hanging out a lot. One way they hung out was by going to each other's houses. When I visited Sophie's house in the city, it seemed much quieter and more sophisticated than mine. Sophie's family was part British, so we would have tea and then learn how to make British food, such as shepherd's pie and marmalade on toast. We would also watch movies together, such as Pride and Prejudice. Another favorite memory I have was when we went over to my house and my siblings would try to join in with whatever we were doing. My house was more loud and unruly than hers. In my opinion, I think her house was better for sleepovers because it was peaceful and more relaxing than mine. Another thing we would do during sleepovers was to gossip about boys we had crushes on. That was the main topic of the night. I think my parents were really happy that I had such a great friend. The church was close to where Sophie lived, so it was easy to pick her up on the way to church. My parents really liked Sophie's family. In conclusion, although it requires some effort on their part, Michelle and Sophie try to find successful ways to connect with each other during the pandemic. We are both married and Sophie has a daughter, so we don't have as much free time to stay in touch. Also, our schedules are different. We both have to be flexible and make time for each other.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Natalie. You know, one thing I want to point out is the sophistication of writing we're seeing from people in 9th grade, right? They are interviewing often adults and then able to feed back some crucial elements of that adult story with an understanding of what their interview was saying and feeling and thinking and living. And I just think that's fantastic. All right. We're getting to the top 3 essays this year. This student in 3rd place interviewed a peer, actually. This was a really touching essay about the impact of the pandemic and what a friend learned about friendship and relationship during a really rough period. So Anaya Gaithens. Anaya, if you're with us, does anyone see Anaya? I'm looking for her. I don't believe she was able to join us, but I will be in touch with Anaya. And one person asked in the chat if all of the essays would be made available online. The answer is yes. All of the essays will be on the blog at thebaldwinprize.org. Moving to 2nd place, this was one of many stories of loss. this student interviewed someone who lost a sister and told a very poignant and ultimately hopeful story. Zoe Cope. Zoe, are you with us? Let me search for her name. Hi, I see asked to unmute.
Yes.
Hi, Zoe.
Hello. Should I read my excerpt now?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. What is the biggest distance of all? I could say beyond reasonable doubt that it's the realm existing between the living and the deceased. Two sisters, Emma and Ava Rogers, were the closest of friends. Every childhood memory either of them had was bound to include the other. The relationships only got stronger as they moved into their teenage years. Emma took her sister under her wing. They were nothing short of inseparable. The relationship continued to evolve until the world came shattering down around them. Everything was getting increasingly difficult to handle, and Emma tragically committed suicide in 2016. When the physical relationship between the sisters was separated, another one formed. Emma had a 16-year-old daughter who fell into the custody of Ava. They bonded quickly, and Ava is proud to say that she is a mom to her. Her daughter looks just like Emma. It feels as if a piece of her is living on through her. Their relationship is one full of love and understanding. As Ava said, her death didn't mean the end of our relationship. I still talk to her, tell her my dirty jokes, and speak about her and her actual life, the good, bad, and ugly. With every step Ava takes to remember her sister, Emma's legacy moves on. She managed to keep the relationship thriving despite this barrier that she faced.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Zoe. So Zoe was our second place essayist. And in case the first place essayist, this student interviewed, I believe it was her father. And it's a story about a family and a father dealing with illness and a change of perspective that comes to help him cope. So Francesca Plovan. Let me see if Francesca, I see two Francescas. I'm going to see if I am asking to unmute the right one.
It's me.
Oh, fantastic. All right.
Now add the butter. Good. Can I add the chocolate, Bubby? Of course. I slowly pour the melted chocolate into the bowl. My sister and I were at my grandmother's house making her famous brownies. We'd made them together at least 50 times before. My grandmother Sybil glances back at the recipe sprawled across her cluttered kitchen table. Wait, we forgot to add the butter, she says. We already put it in, don't worry, I reassure her. That was 6 years ago. Bubby Sybil now lives in a memory care facility, and we are not allowed to visit her because of COVID precautions. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's a couple of years ago and can no longer retain new information. It has taken a lot of patience to adapt to this new form of communication with her, particularly for my father. He had to learn a new way to connect with his mother and reroute how he perceived both his and her worlds. My father, Bradley, has always been a detail-oriented person who works best with reason and logic. So for him, dealing with a parent with Alzheimer's disease is especially taxing because no amount of medicine or surgery can cure it. Within his times of distress, however, something helped him keep his composure. Seeing pieces of Bubby's personality seep through her wall of memory loss. Her talkative and playful, albeit unintelligible, conversation reminded him that the important thing is to have the conversation, not to have it be about anything in particular.
Thank you so much, Francesca. So you have heard from, yes, a big hand for everyone. You have heard from 4 of the 5 top finishers in the Baldwin Prize this year, but I really hope that every student who participated got so much out of it. I just want to say that the Baldwin Prize began a little more than 6 years ago, honestly, because I was embarrassed. City is a really old school, 3rd oldest public high school in the nation. And because we're so old and have had so many prestigious alumni, we have our own Hall of Fame. at a public high school in Baltimore. And because of my work as a journalist, there were other people I had nothing to do with it who voted me into their Hall of Fame. And so the induction ceremony was 6 years ago. The idea that I would be in any club that included at least one governor, some senators, a former mayor of Baltimore, I honestly, it just did not sit comfortably with me. So I decided I needed to make my induction speech about the school and about the students and not about me. So I said, okay, City was where I began to learn how to write. James Baldwin has been one of the most formative writers in my life. And that's how the idea for the Baldwin Prize was formed. I came up with the idea so that I would feel better about giving my induction speech. I announced the Baldwin Prize that day. And look at where we are, everyone. This was an idea in one person's head. The first, many of you don't know this, but the number of essays we had in the first year, it was exactly 2. Because it wasn't an assignment. It grew from 2 to some years more than 400 participating. And students, I want you to see this. The work you are doing is so powerful that all I have to do is send one email to the assistant of very important people like Professor Glaude, and they show up for you. And let's be clear, they don't show up for me, they show up for you because they love you and they love what you are doing. So thank that person who asked that question about what we are doing to build communities of love. So several decades ago, a gay Black boy was born who thought he was loveless, who thought he might, I imagine, thought he might not have much of a chance in the world. And we are all here today because of him. So I want to tell you now that if you have an idea that you think does not have a chance, it does, especially if it's meant to help people, if it's motivated by the right reasons. The world can make space for you. I have felt that hopelessness, the idea that there's no space in the world for me. The world can and will make space for you. And oh my goodness, if you connect with the right people, there is no end to what you can do. I thank you all for joining us today. The students who have won, I will follow up with you directly, and I cannot wait to do this again. Thank you so much.